The frontier colony was a place where survival was traded as cheaply as air. Metal shanties, neon signs, and dust storms painted the streets, while merchants sold everything from tools to flesh without shame. Companionship contracts had become another commodity, accepted by both humans and aliens as part of life. In this world, loneliness was bought, paid for, and carried away like cargo. Marcus, a human mechanic, walked those streets as a man hollowed out by years of labor. His workshop was filled with broken engines and discarded dreams, and he moved through life with the weariness of someone who had given up on finding meaning. He had scars on his hands from years of fixing machines that kept others alive, yet no one cared who kept him alive. To the colony, he was invisible. To himself, he was empty. When he entered the contract hall, he expected nothing more than a temporary distraction. Men and women exchanged credits for warmth that lasted until sunrise, and Marcus had never indulged before. But tonight, silence weighed too heavily on him. He signed the rental slip with mechanical motions, convincing himself it was only one night. They brought her forward, and he froze. She was alien, yet her presence stirred something human inside him. Her skin shimmered faintly, marked with hues foreign to Earth. Her frame was slender, fragile even, but her eyes were what caught him. They carried no spark of choice, only obedience dulled by repetition. She was Sarai, though the syndicate called her property. Marcus had expected someone rehearsed in charm, but instead, she stood quietly, waiting for command. He could see it, the weight of conditioning pressed into her shoulders. She had lived a life where her words and will were stripped away. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because no one had ever given her another path. Back in his quarters, silence filled the space between them. Marcus sat down and realized he didn't know what to say. The contract gave him rights, but those rights made his stomach turn. Instead of exploiting them, he gestured to the seat across from him. She hesitated, surprised, then sat carefully as though afraid to displease him. He offered her food, simple rations heated from his supplies. She blinked at it in confusion before tasting, then whispered thanks, voice soft, unsure. He asked her name, though he already knew it from the contract slip, but the act of asking seemed to matter to her. Sarai spoke it carefully, as if rediscovering what it meant to be called by name instead of number. As the hours stretched on, Marcus noticed small things. The way her hands trembled when she held the cup. The way her gaze darted toward the door, measuring the time until she would be taken back. He recognized fear disguised as calm, and it unsettled him more than any loneliness ever had. She told him little at first, cautious with words, but fragments slipped through. She had been taken young, purchased, passed between owners, until she ended up under syndicate contracts. To them, she was inventory. To Marcus, sitting across from her, she was someone who had been stripped of choice her entire life. The realization settled like iron in his chest. He had rented her, but not because she had offered herself. He was participating in the same system that had caged her, even if only for one night. The thought gnawed at him, and he found himself avoiding her gaze, ashamed of his own choice. Yet she looked at him differently than she had looked at the syndicate guards. Her eyes, once dulled, softened with confusion. No one had offered her food without demand. No one had asked her to sit as an equal. She noticed he had not touched her, had not claimed what the contract allowed. Instead, he asked about her world, her people, the colors of her sky. She hesitated, then spoke of home as though describing a dream half forgotten. Marcus listened, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. Every word she gave him was fragile, precious, and he treated them as if they were treasures. She began to realize that for the first time, someone was seeing her as more than what the syndicate had sold. The night pressed on, and Marcus repaired a broken tool while she watched. Sparks danced in the dim light, and Sarai tilted her head, curious. He explained the work, clumsy in his words, and she laughed softly. The sound startled him. It was the first time he had heard her voice rise with something other than restraint. He felt something stir in his chest, something he had buried long ago, the sense that connection was still possible. But every tick of the clock reminded him of dawn. At sunrise, the syndicate would come to collect her. He would hand her back, and she would vanish into the machine that had built her cage. The thought gnawed at him, heavier with each passing minute. Sarai must have sensed it too, because she broke the silence with a whisper. She admitted she dreaded the morning, not because of punishment, but because for the first time, she had been treated as if her existence mattered. Marcus swallowed hard, words failing him. He wanted to promise her safety, but the colony's chains reached deeper than his courage had ever gone. He told himself it was only one night, a temporary moment of humanity shared in a world that stripped it away. But as her eyes lingered on him, uncertain yet hopeful, Marcus knew the lie couldn't hold. He couldn't unsee her pain. He couldn't unhear the longing in her voice. He couldn't return her to a life of ownership, not after glimpsing the person hidden beneath. When she fell asleep in the corner chair, exhaustion overtaking her, Marcus sat awake in silence. He studied the curve of her face, the faint rise and fall of her breath, and realized he had crossed a line within himself. He hadn't just rented an alien girl. He had opened a door he could never close again. The night that began with loneliness now burned with guilt, and beneath that guilt flickered something unexpected: resolve. He had thought he was buying silence, but he had found a voice. He had thought he was buying company, but he had found meaning. Dawn would come soon, and with it, the syndicate's knock. But as Marcus watched Sarai sleep, one truth hardened in his chest. He could not let them take her back. Not now. Not ever. Marcus did not sleep when dawn came. The sound of boots outside the quarters reminded him that the syndicate never failed to collect what it believed belonged to them. He looked at Sarai as she stirred awake, her expression changing from brief peace to the familiar dread she had worn when he first saw her. She knew what waited outside the door. He tried to offer her calm, but his hands betrayed the storm building inside him. When she spoke, her words were small, almost resigned. She thanked him for the night, not as a customer thanks a service, but as someone who had been given the smallest glimpse of freedom. Marcus realized she had already accepted her chains, and the weight of that acceptance broke something inside him. He told her she deserved more. The words surprised her, and she looked at him as though he had spoken something forbidden. Her species had been conditioned to believe their worth ended with the contracts, and yet here was a human saying she was worth more than all the credits the syndicate could demand. She asked why he would say such a thing, and Marcus had no answer that made sense. He only knew it was true. The minutes slipped away, the knock would come, but before it did he asked her to tell him about her life. Not the fragments, not the rehearsed stories she had been made to tell, but the truth. She hesitated, afraid, and then she told him. She had been taken young, sold before she could understand what freedom meant. Her people had once thrived on a world of forests and rivers, but now the syndicate used them as assets. She had never been given a choice in anything: where to live, who to speak to, what to dream of. Marcus listened, and the more he heard the more fury burned beneath his skin. She spoke of her first contract, of how she had tried to resist and was beaten until she stopped resisting. She spoke of how she had learned to smile without meaning it, how she had learned silence was safer than honesty. She spoke of how every sunrise was another reminder that her life was not her own. By the time she finished, Marcus felt the room closing in on him. He realized he was part of the chain that bound her. Even if he had treated her with kindness, the credits he had paid had strengthened the system that enslaved her. He hated himself for it, and yet he also knew he had been given a chance to change it. Sarai studied him, confusion in her eyes. She had been trained to expect only indifference, cruelty at worst, disinterest at best. But Marcus was different. He was angry on her behalf, and that anger unsettled her as much as it moved her. She asked him why it mattered to him. He told her it mattered because she was someone, not something. The silence after those words was heavier than any sound. The knock came at the door. The syndicate collectors announced themselves, their tone sharp, rehearsed, uncaring. Sarai flinched, already bracing to leave. Marcus looked at her and made his choice. He told her to stay quiet, and he didn't move to open the door. They pounded again, this time with threat. Marcus stood, every muscle tense, and for the first time in years his life felt clear. He told Sarai he would not give her back. She stared at him, wide-eyed, unsure if he was speaking madness or salvation. He armed himself with the only things he knew: tools, not weapons. A wrench heavy in his hand, a welding torch that sparked like lightning. He positioned himself between Sarai and the door, as if his battered frame could shield her from everything outside. The collectors grew impatient. They threatened to break the lock, to drag him before the overseers. Marcus shouted back that they would not take her. His voice shook, but it carried something he had not felt in years: conviction. Sarai whispered that he would be killed. She told him no one had ever fought the Syndicate and lived. Marcus only answered that maybe no one had tried hard enough. His words were reckless, but his eyes were steady. She saw that steadiness and felt something stir within her, something long buried beneath years of resignation. The door rattled, but did not break. For now, they retreated, promising return with more force. Marcus knew he had little time. He began packing tools, supplies, anything that could help them run. Sarai watched, torn between fear and awe. She asked why he would risk everything for her when he had known her only one night. His answer was simple: because no one else ever had. They spoke as he worked, hurried but meaningful. She admitted she had dreamed once, long ago, of being more than what she had been forced to be. She had let the dream die because holding it hurt too much. Now, hearing him speak, watching him fight for her, the dream began to stir again. Marcus paused, meeting her gaze. He told her that life without choice was not life at all, and that he would rather die trying to change it than live another day pretending he could ignore it. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Sarai stepped closer and placed her hand against his, a gesture small but defiant. She told him she would follow wherever he led, even if it meant the end. Night fell again before they moved. The Syndicate would come with more men, more weapons, but Marcus had already decided. The one-night contract had ended, but his resolve had only begun. As they prepared to slip into the shadows of the colony, Sarai whispered that she wished the night they had shared would never have ended. Marcus turned to her, his voice low but fierce, and said that it hadn't. It had only just begun. The colony at night was a maze of rusted alleys, flickering neon, and the constant hum of machinery. Marcus moved through it with Sarai close behind, every step heavy with the knowledge that the Syndicate would soon unleash its enforcers. The choice he had made was irreversible. He had crossed a line that men on this colony never dared to cross. Sarai kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting armored figures to appear at any moment. Fear pressed against her, but Marcus walked with purpose. She noticed how his shoulders carried more than the weight of supplies. They carried determination, the kind she had never seen in anyone before. The first clash came sooner than expected. 2 Syndicate enforcers blocked the path, demanding Sarai's return. Their voices were bored, casual, as though this confrontation was nothing new to them. They saw Marcus as nothing but a mechanic, someone easy to bend or break. Marcus gripped the wrench tighter. Words were useless, and hesitation would kill them. He struck first, fast and desperate. The sound of metal against bone rang through the alley. The fight was brutal, not graceful. He fought like a man who knew nothing but stubborn survival. One enforcer fell, the other lunged, and sparks flew as Marcus swung the welding torch, blinding light filling the night. Sarai froze, torn between terror and awe. She had never seen someone fight for her, never seen anyone risk their life for her freedom. When the second enforcer collapsed, groaning, she rushed to Marcus, who was bleeding from a cut along his arm but refused to slow. He told her they had to keep moving. Word of the defiance spread quickly. The Syndicate thrived on fear, and fear spread through whispers. A mechanic refusing to return a contract girl was unheard of. By the time Marcus and Sarai reached the outer districts, more eyes were watching them. Some with pity, some with scorn, a few with something new: quiet admiration. Marcus used every trick his years of labor had given him. He rigged doors to jam, overloaded circuits to create diversions, and led Sarai through maintenance tunnels only workers like him knew existed. She realized his skills, the ones others dismissed as worthless, were now the only reason they had a chance. But the Syndicate was relentless. They sent more enforcers, better armed, confident they could break him like they had broken countless others. The chase pushed Marcus and Sarai into the scrapyards at the colony's edge, where broken ships lay like skeletons under the dim glow of stars. Among twisted metal and abandoned engines, Marcus made his stand again. Enforcers closed in, their weapons gleaming. Marcus fought with desperation, swinging tools, setting off sparks, using flames from a torch to drive them back. He was not faster, not stronger, but he was relentless. Every time they thought he would fall, he surged forward again, fueled not by skill but by refusal to yield. Sarai tried to help in whatever way she could. She was not trained to fight, but her instincts guided her. She distracted enemies, hurled debris, and once placed herself in harm's way to give Marcus the moment he needed to strike. In her, Marcus saw not a fragile prisoner but someone willing to fight beside him, even when fear consumed her. The battle left them both battered. Marcus's arm was torn, his ribs ached with every breath, but he refused to stop. The enforcers fell back, not defeated completely but slowed. For the first time, they realized he was not just one man. They realized he had become a symbol. If one human mechanic could resist, others might wonder if they could too. As they hid among the rusting hulls, Sarai tended to his wounds with trembling hands. She whispered that he should have let her go, that no one was worth this much risk. Marcus met her eyes and told her she was wrong. She was worth everything, because no one else had ever dared to believe it. She did not know how to answer. Her heart pounded with something unfamiliar, a warmth she had thought was impossible. For the first time in her life, she felt she belonged to herself, not to the syndicate. And that feeling came from the human who refused to give her back. The escape could not end at the scrapyard. Marcus knew the syndicate would regroup and strike harder. Their only hope was to leave the colony altogether. He explained his plan to steal passage off-world, to use a freighter docked at the yards. It was reckless, bordering on madness, but it was the only chance. Sarai listened and nodded. She told him she would follow, even if the stars themselves turned against them. Her voice shook, but her resolve did not. Marcus felt pride stir in him, mixed with something deeper he had not allowed himself to feel in years: hope. The night stretched long, filled with close calls and desperate moves. They avoided patrols, slipped through cargo routes, and pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. Marcus carried the weight of every decision, and Sarai carried the weight of trust she had never given anyone before. When the freighter finally came into view, hulking and half-maintained, it felt like salvation on the horizon. But salvation was never so simple. The syndicate was waiting, surrounding the docking area with more enforcers than before. Marcus gritted his teeth, realizing this would not be escape, it would be a final stand. Sarai looked at him, fear in her eyes, but also something else. She told him she had lived her whole life being handed from one owner to another, never knowing what it meant to choose. Tonight, for the first time, she chose. She chose to fight with him. She chose not to return. Marcus tightened his grip on the wrench, pain coursing through his body, but his resolve stronger than ever. The syndicate thought they were chasing one runaway girl and one foolish mechanic. They were wrong. They were facing something they could never buy or chain. As the enforcers advanced, Marcus whispered to Sarai that they would not win by surrendering. They would win by proving they were willing to fight for even one moment of freedom. Sarai's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded, standing at his side. The fight began again, fiercer, more desperate. Sparks lit the scrapyard like stars fallen to earth. Marcus struck, Sarai defended, both of them moving not as captive and customer, but as equals bound by defiance. And for the first time, the syndicate hesitated. For the first time, they saw fear not in the alien girl's eyes, but in their own. The fight at the freighter docks burned into the night, every clash of metal against metal echoing through the yard. Marcus fought with a body that screamed in pain, ribs tight, blood soaking his sleeve, yet he refused to let go. Sarai stayed beside him, no longer the frightened girl who had been resigned to chains, but someone who fought for her own life with every scrap of courage she could gather. The syndicate's enforcers pressed forward, confident their numbers would break the resistance. But the longer the battle dragged, the more hesitation grew in their eyes. They were used to victims, to silence, to obedience. They were not used to a mechanic standing unyielding, not used to an alien girl meeting their blows with fire in her gaze. What was supposed to be a routine retrieval had turned into a spectacle none of them had expected. Marcus caught glimpses of workers gathering at the edges of the yard. Mechanics, dockhands, scrap haulers, the forgotten people of the colony. They watched in silence at first, but slowly the silence shifted. Whispers spread. Some saw only folly, but others saw possibility. If one man could stand, perhaps they could too. The syndicate relied on fear, and fear was slipping through its grasp. The enforcers regrouped, circling. Their leader barked orders, promising punishment not only for Marcus and Sarai but for anyone who dared to shelter them. He raised his weapon and aimed to strike a finishing blow. Marcus braced himself, body ready to take whatever came, when something unexpected happened. A piece of scrap metal flew from the shadows, striking the enforcer across the head. One of the workers had acted. Then another. The crowd that had watched now surged forward, armed with nothing but tools and resolve. The yard erupted in chaos. Marcus and Sarai used the moment, pushing toward the freighter as the enforcers struggled to control the growing unrest. Marcus's vision blurred with pain, but Sarai kept him steady, her arm tight around him as they forced their way through. For the first time in her life, she felt not hunted, not caged, but alive. Every breath was her own, every step a defiance of the life that had been written for her. Inside the freighter, alarms blared as systems powered. Marcus knew he had minutes at best. He dragged himself into the cockpit, his hands trembling but precise, the years of working on machines guiding him. Sarai stood guard, clutching a metal rod like a weapon, daring anyone to step through the hatch. She had no training, no strength compared to the enforcers, but her presence was unshakable. The engines roared, and the freighter began to lift. Syndicate forces swarmed the docks, firing into the hull, desperate to drag them back down. Marcus pushed the systems harder, his body threatening to give out. Then the freighter tore free of the dock, rising above the colony that had known only silence and submission for so long. Below, the workers who had risen against their masters watched the ship vanish into the sky, and something unspoken passed among them. If a mechanic and a contract girl could defy the syndicate, maybe the rest of them could too. As stars spread across the viewport, Marcus sagged in the chair, every ounce of strength spent. Sarai rushed to him, fear in her eyes, but he managed a faint smile. He told her they had made it, even if he did not know what waited beyond. She held his face in her hands and told him he was a fool, the bravest fool she had ever known. For the first time, her tears were not of despair but of something far more powerful. She realized the chains that had bound her were not only broken by his defiance but by her own choice to stand with him. She had chosen to fight, chosen to live, chosen to love. Marcus's hand found hers, rough and trembling, and he whispered that she was no longer rented, no longer owned, no longer a contract. She was free, and he would fight until his last breath to keep it that way. Sarai leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his, her voice breaking as she told him she had never belonged to anyone until this moment, until she chose to give her heart to him. The freighter drifted into the silence of space, stars burning around them like endless promise. Marcus set the course away from the colony, away from the reach of the syndicate, toward the unknown. Sarai sat beside him, her hands still clasped in his, the weight of her past heavy but no longer inescapable. She was not the girl who had been bought and sold. She was someone reborn in the fire of defiance, someone who had found freedom not in escape alone but in the human who refused to abandon her. Beyond the viewport, the galaxy stretched vast and uncertain. They had no wealth, no allies, no guarantee of safety. What they had was fragile, but it was real, a human's reckless compassion and an alien girl's reclaimed will. It was more than either had ever believed possible. Marcus looked at her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, and told her that the night he had rented her was the night his own life had changed forever. She smiled through her tears, answering that he had not rented her, he had found her. Together they watched the stars, not as master and captive, not as buyer and bought, but as two souls who had chosen each other against all odds. And in that choice, they discovered something the syndicate could never touch, never sell, never break. Love born from defiance, fragile yet unyielding, enough to carry them into forever.